fun video is private equity compensation. This video will provide a brief overview of private equity compensation and how it's changing today. This is intended for those in the Certified Private Equity Professional designation. Buyout firm compensation. Buyout firms operate using the 2 and 20 model. This means that funds primarily make their money through the 2% management fee and the 20% performance fee, also known as carried interest or the carry. This structure is changing. It has always been subject to change. Some smaller firms, if they're unproven or if they've had particularly rough years, they'll sometimes lower this fee to maybe a 1 in 15%, but that's pretty rare. It's usually like 2 and 19% if they're really going to lower it. And some firms will increase this by a lot. This goes across the alternative investment or alternative asset community. Hedge funds charge about the same structure, but again, subject to change. Larger managers, Carlyle Group, that kind of thing, will probably charge a little bit higher because they've proven that they're able to generate returns on a consistent basis and that they can generate really high returns. So investors will be willing to pay more. This is then distributed to the firm's employees, with the highest compensation going to the general partners in the fund, and then going down to the lowest, which is non-senior analysts and junior level employees. This is pretty typical, and when compensation has to go down, a lot of times the people who are going to feel it most are the analysts and low-level employees. Current compensation trends. This is going off a recent compensation report I've read, as well as people I know in the industry and just things from following the industry that I've picked up. Buyout compensation has declined or at least stayed the same, but it's still highly competitive to other industries. Hedge funds have had a particularly good 2009, continuing in 2010, so they might be able to pick up some more talent from private equity firms by offering a little bit more. But generally, buyout firms are able to compete in compensation and sometimes are even the highest paying in the financial industry. Given the economic and financial troubles in 2007 and 2009, no major decline is okay. It's not great, and even if there is a bit of a decline, it's still pretty decent for how much buyout firms have been struggling to produce deals. But venture capital compensation did not fall last year as much as for buyout firms, only by a little bit, but because venture capital struggled as well. But they're not reliant on transaction charges for, so low deal flow for them was not going to hurt them as much as it has for private equity firms. On to salary and size of the buyout firm. Pay in the larger buyout firms, this is $1 billion in assets plus, always going to be better than in the smaller and mid-market firms, which are smaller firms would be below 300 million, mid-market 300 million to 1 billion. And however, in 2009, the largest firms took the biggest year-over-year pay cut. This has an important caveat that even with the reduction, large private equity employees still make $368,000 in overall compensation at large private equity firms, which is more than the medium and smaller buyout firms by about 50,000. But that's again, that's average private equity employees at large private equity firms, which is in excess of $1 billion. Professionals at large buyout firms received a cut of 14% to their overall compensation. That includes salaries, bonus, and carried interest. On the other hand, small and medium-sized private equity firms saw increases in compensation 4% and 20% respectively. What that really shows, that's about a year old, so that's probably going to change a little bit. Even the small and medium-sized, they weren't spending as much on compensation because they're not competed with as heavily to keep their talent, and they weren't relying as much on compensation as the larger buyout firms, the Carlyles, the KKR, were having to pay their employees a great deal, and they knew they were going to have to make some cuts. I think Carlyle Group made some significant staff reduction. They're probably starting to hire again more, as a lot of firms are right now, now that the recession has pretty much petered out. Associate level compensation, I'm focusing on this because a lot of people taking the private equity professional designation are focused on getting into the entry level position, which is typically the associate level. So associate compensation is competitive with other industries. The largest reduction in compensation was at the associate level. They're first on the chopping block, as I said before. Usually the way that buyout firms are going to cut their compensation costs are to cut the lower level employees, because they know that a lot of these young professionals are going to be able to take that salary cut, whereas they're not going to be able to keep the top talent, the general partners, satisfied if they're not if they're cutting their salaries and bonuses considerably. Also, last year, average associate compensation fell by 10% to $275,000. This is still pretty competitive, and just to go down to $275,000 is probably sounds pretty good to those outside of the private equity industry, but it is a 10% cut for those large buyout firms. In 2008, associate compensation at big buyout firms rose 6%. Went up 22% in 2007. That's the year of the mega buyouts. 2005 through 2007 was pretty much a heyday for buyout firms, and they were really raising compensation, trying to spread the wealth around for the great deals and the successes that they had during that time. Now that the recession and just mainly a reality check on the industry, we see compensation starting to go back down. But if we have a rise in mega buyouts again, expect this trend to pick back up and the compensation to rise again. The source for that is 2010 Private Equity Compensation Report, which I just had forwarded to me recently. Now I want to move on to the carried interest tax. This could have significant ramifications for private equity compensation. Proposal in Congress recommended most of the recommendations are to close the carried interest tax benefit by taxing all carried interest earned by private equity management as ordinary income, which can be as high as 35%, rather than capital gains, which is taxed at 15%. A lot of people outside the industry think this is pretty unfair to have buyout professionals, the management, taking home a tax cut on, especially when it's such a significant amount as the carried interest, which can be millions and millions of dollars, but that's also a significant revenue for private equity firms, and they operate using this carried interest as a way of paying their employees, as a way of staying afloat financially. So it's going to be a pretty big deal. There's a lot of campaign contributions going from private equity professionals, the managers, and they're going towards different politicians, which could have the effect of preventing this regulation. But most recent proposal I've seen has been softened a little by Max Baucus, who's chairing the Senate Financial Committee, and his take on it is that I think it was a percentage of the carried interest will be taxed as capital gains at the 15% level, while some of it, I think it was 60 or 65% of it will be taxed at the ordinary income level, which could be as high as 35%. So, assuming that the current Congress will probably get this through as part of the financial reforms, this cut in profit could end up hurting compensation, especially at the lower level. As I've said before, a lot of times the cuts will go towards the lower part of the firm, and this is just an important thing to keep in mind. But still, compensation at private equity firms is very competitive, always will be. Buyout firms have always been able to pay their employees very well because they've always been able to generate high profits and high returns. It's a very profitable business, and it's a very profitable business to be part of.